record. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the helminth today. So you probably heard this term helminth before, but it means worm. So we're talking about worms. You've probably heard about some worms that are parasitic, like tapeworms and so forth, and they cause human disease. We're going to take a look at a few of those today. I would like you to know some very basic characteristics of these helminths. Okay, they're multicellular. Okay. They're eukaryotic invertebrates. All right, so that's a very important distinguishing factor. They don't have a backbone. They have either a tube-like or flattened bodies. They have the characteristic of bilateral symmetry. That's definitely something you should put in your notes. Bilateral symmetry means that if you were to lie these organisms down flat and cut them in half, they're going to be mirror images of each other. Okay. They do have digestive and reproductive tracts that can look a little different depending on the species. Some reproductive tracts are incomplete. They can be obviously free living, like in aquatic or various terrestrial environments, but they're also parasitic. All right, and we're interested in those that are parasitic, particularly to humans, animals, and plants, as those are sources of food for us. All right, so these are just some basic characteristics when we're, characterizing and trying to distinguish amongst different types of parasites. All right, those protozoa that we talked about the last couple of weeks were characteristically different. They were also eukaryotic, but they were unicellular, and they had some other different characteristics. Here we're looking at our multicellular eukaryotic worms. Okay, there's different types of worms. We have roundworms, we have those tapeworms, and we have flukes. Okay, some of these worms can be identified based on their body makeup and the body cavity that they have. Acolymates, pseudocolymates, and colmates. All right, so we'll look at some distinguishing features between each of those body cavity makeups that these helminths can be distinguished by. In terms of classification, again, these are some basic pieces of information that we want you to know. We don't expect you to be an expert in helminths after these couple lectures, but just that basic understanding that if you hear the term nematode, that's going to be a roundworm. Okay, their body is going to kind of be that cylindrical shape. They do have a body cavity, so they're going to be colymates. They do have a complete digestive tract. They do have a complete and separate reproductive system, reproductive organs. They're not hermaphrodites. So these nematodes are going to be either male or female, one or the other. The cestodes, that's going to be the tapeworm. Okay, these are the ones that you probably have heard about before from a human standpoint in terms of illnesses. These tapeworms are segmented. Okay, that's a very distinguishing feature of the tapeworm. Okay, they don't have that body cavity or lining, so they're going to be acolymates. No complete digestive tract. They are hermaphrodites. The hermaphroditic characteristic that they have both male and female reproductive organs within the same body. So roundworms, tapeworms, and then we have trematodes. Okay, trematodes are the flukes. Okay, these are unsegmented worms. Okay, these unsegmented flatworms. Acolymates, incomplete digestive tract. They're also hermaphroditic, except the schistosomas, and we'll talk a lot about the schistosomas because they actually cause human disease. All right. So I do want you to know, again, some of the basic identifying characteristics of a roundworm, of a tapeworm, and of a fluke. Okay, let's start out with the roundworms, these nematodes. Write down the term nematodes. These are our classic roundworms. Roundworms. All right, so the class Nematoda, these are the roundworms. They comprise of the group of organisms containing the largest number of helminths that are parasites to humans. So most of the worms, the helminth worms that are human parasites are gonna be in this class, okay, the nematodes. Again, I already talked about the features that they're unsegmented. That is important. They do exhibit bilateral symmetry. Okay, and there's a lot of variation that we see in the life cycle of these helminths. Okay, they're generally long-lived. They can live anywhere from 30 years, 1 to 30 years and onward. Okay, again, these are certainly free-living organisms. You can find them out in, you know, water, soil, and so forth. But we also find them in their parasitic forms where they're inside of various hosts like humans and animals and so forth. All right. They can vary in size. Again, it just depends on the species of the organism. What? What are you doing? Jillian, please leave. What are you doing? Turn around and leave. What are you doing? Close the door. 2 minutes. Thank you. 1 minute. All right. The roundworm, as I mentioned before, they're the most abundant of the helminths, so they're outnumbering the other tapeworms and flukes. All right. They can be found in various environments. They're parasitic to a number of different hosts, including humans. And those are the ones we care about. We care about the ones that are parasitic to other hosts as well, because again, plants and animals are also sources of food for us. Nematode, let's look at the body structure, the makeup. All right, the head, the adult head of a nematode, you're going to see hooks. That's, you know, going to help with attachment to their host. They have teeth or cutting plates in their buccal cavity in the mouth area. That these hooks and teeth are going to aid in attachment to the host. Okay. The body cavity, the body surface is kind of covered in this cuticle covering. There are muscle layers underneath that cuticle. Internally, they do have a CNS, like a nervous cords and nerves and so forth. They have a well-developed digestive system. They have complete reproductive organs, and I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier. So just like you would see in a normal male, you're going to see the male testes, the vas deferens, seminal vesicles, ejaculatory ducts. So the same characteristic reproductive organs will be present in these worms or helminths. Likewise, in the female, you're going to see the characteristic reproductive organs such as the ovaries, the uterus, the vagina, the oviduct. Okay. The reproductive capacity is going to be sexual reproduction, hence the fact that these are not hermaphroditic organisms. So it's actually going to take 2 for sexual reproduction to occur. But by definition, that's what sexual reproduction is. It's going to require 2 mates, okay, in order to reproduce a new organism. This is a diagram of a female helminth, okay, a roundworm. Up in this anterior region, you're going to have the mouth, and you've got some other nerve endings and the pharynx, intestine, this sort of pseudocolon, this cavity that's present. And then you have this reproductive area where we got our ovaries and so forth. And then we have our anus. If we compared that to the male, again, we're going to see a very similar organization from the head or anterior region. You've got the mouth and the other, you know, digestive components of the mouth that's going to lead into the stomach and the intestines, your pharynx. You have your intestines. You have ovaries in this female and testes over in the male. You've got your uterus and vulva, all of these structures or components that are necessary for reproduction. And then we have our anus for the release of waste. All right, we have an intestine here for food processing. Okay, so let's look at some of the different hosts for these roundworms. The humans are an example of a definitive host. Okay, arthropods may serve as an intermediate host or as vectors. We talked about vectors a little bit earlier in the semester and their role in parasitic diseases, and they act as sort of vehicles or carriers of parasitic organisms and transmit them from one host to the next, so they can be an intermediate host. Many of the nematodes can develop, without that intermediate host existing. Okay. Let's look at the life cycle of the nematode. Okay, there are three stages of development that these helminths can exist in. When they're in their egg phase, that's basically when the organism is protected by this hard outer shell. All right, the larval stage is once that egg begins to hatch, it starts to develop into larvae. Okay, this is a process, a phase where there's a process known as molting taking place during development. Molting is a two-step process where basically this larva is going to shed that outer covering, okay, and a new kind of more flexible cuticle covering will grow. Okay, so that synthesis and exsheathment takes place. Okay, write down the term molting in your notes and go out and make sure you understand what molting is. Okay, that's in the larvae stage. The last developmental stage is going to be the mature adult form, and that's going to be the form at which this organism will exit or leave the host. Okay, so we have our egg phase of development. We have the various larval stages, L1 through L4, and then we have the adult form. So let's look at what's happening. All right. Collectively, the entire development from the egg to a mature adult is going to take place over 7 stages. Okay. So we got the egg stage. That's basically when this organism is in an egg and it's covered by this hard shell covering. There's 4 larval stages again, L1 through L4. Okay. L1 is the sort of embryonic stage, if you will, where this organism is developing inside of the egg. L2 is, again, is some internal growth spurts taking place. During this 3rd or L3 larval stage, this is going to be the infective stage for this particular larvae. L4 is the final larval stage inside of the host, and then it's basically going to mature into an adult worm. Okay. 2 adult stages, either we're going to create a male or a female. Again, this is the unique class of nematodes that it's undergoes sexual reproduction, so there needs to be both male and female available. Okay. Adult in an adult stage is going to be an immature stage until it gets through L5, when it becomes sexually mature and reproduction can take place. All right, so this is the basic life cycle of the nematode. Make sure you grab those. All right, let's look at some of the nematodes that are human parasites. Okay, Ascarias. Okay, Phalaris, hookworms, pinworms, whipworms. These are all examples of nematodes that are parasitic in human, and the human is the definitive host. We'll start with the Ascarias. I'm sorry, I backed up too far. Ascaris. Okay. The CDC reports that this is the most common human worm infection. Okay. Infection occurs pretty much no place is exempt, right? But we're looking heavily at areas where sanitation, poor hygiene, and so forth. All right. So this causes an intestinal disease. So we kind of characterize some intestinal discomfort with some of our protozoan pathogens. Okay. The disease name is Ascariasis. Okay. The adult worm is going to be found inside of the human intestines. Okay. So this is a roundworm infection, Ascariasis. Write that down. The most common nematode infection in humans. The causative agent for this disease, the Ascariasis is the disease, and it's caused by the helminth or the roundworm named Ascaris lumbricoides. All right. You can find both developed matured worms in the human intestine. You can also find eggs present. All right. Eggs are passed out in feces of an infected person. Some way or another, it makes its way into the soil. All right. Humans become infected by ingesting infected eggs. All right. So that infected eggs are in the larvae form can be infective. So somehow or another, we're ingesting it. Okay. In contaminated foods or water. All right. So one of the assignments that I want you to work on today is describing the Ascaris infection cycle. Okay. So the host, how is it transmitted, and what are some symptoms of the infection? Okay. I also would like for you to research some of the other human roundworm infections. Okay. The filarias, pinworms, hookworms, you've probably heard about them before. All right. We're going to keep going today. Normally, I would stop here and let you go finish working on the nematodes, but we're going to move on today because we're a little behind. And let's look at some cestodes. Okay. These cestodes, as you can see, morphologically are different. They're segmented worms. Okay. The roundworm was one single worm, unsegmented. Okay. These cestodes, this is the tapeworms that you've probably heard about before. Okay. General characteristics is that they have these flat, segmented, ribbon-like bodies. Okay. You can see that here. This kind of resembles a ribbon, if you will. You see these different segments of proglottids. We're going to look at this is also another example of these segmented worms. We refer to those segments as proglottids. Go ahead and write that term down, proglottids. Okay. They can grow anywhere from 15 to 30 feet long. They don't have that internal body cavity, so we call them acolymates. Okay. There's no digestive tract. So these tapeworms survive or get the nutrients that they need by way of absorptive nutrition. So they're absorbing nutrients from their host. This is contrast to the nematode. These are hermaphroditic organisms. Okay, so there's going to be both male and female reproductive organs on each segment. Okay, so each one of those segments that are present on the worm is like a worm, like an individual worm. They both have reproductive tract. Each segment can reproduce. Obviously, these parasites are these worms are endoparasites. This tapeworm is going to be found inside of the small intestines of the adult worm is going to be found inside of the small intestines, but we can find the larval stages taking place throughout tissue. There are some intermediate hosts, again, which kind of serves as a source of infection for humans if we ingest contaminated portions of pigs, cows, fish. Okay, there are tapeworms specific to each of these intermediate hosts. Humans serve as a definitive host where those final stages of development take place. Morphologically, again, we're looking at this segmented body. Okay, it's composed of 3 distinct portions. So we have that head region that we'll call the scolex. Okay, there's the in the scolex, again, there's going to be those sort of teeth or suckers or hooks that are helping to attach to the host. All right, that's the scolex or head region. We have a neck region where there's actively dividing parts that we'll call the strobila. Okay, this is sort of the body of the worm. Okay, and then we have these individual proglottids here. Okay, so those that neck region is going to lead into the strobila, the body. Okay, which are basically the chains of segments, or the what we also call the proglottids. All right, so we have the scolex or the head region. We have the strobila, which is basically the body that contains all of these segments. Okay. All right. So do catch these terms here. All right. And, you know, for the sake of understanding these organisms and how they function, again, we have these teeth or suckers or hooks in the head region that's going to help it to attach to its host. All right, this is just another image of what this tapeworm looks like. So we have the scolex here, we have a neck region, all right, and then we have these immature proglottids, and then gravid proglottids are what contain fertilized eggs. So the terms here, scolex and strobila, are 2 terms that you should be familiar with when describing the morphology or structure, the body of the tapeworm, cestodes. Okay, head region, and then the body with segments, okay, or proglottids. Okay. So how does this tapeworm develop? All right, new segments are basically going to be made, and it's going to push back from that head region. You're just going to continue to see these segments being produced. All right, immature proglottids are continuing to push back during development. They don't have the reproductive organs that are necessary. As they mature, eggs are going to be produced, and when these proglottids become filled with eggs, they're going to be called gravid. That means that they are now mature. Okay, so gravid proglottids are going to contain those eggs that are necessary for reproduction. Life cycle. All right, so we talked about some basic characteristics. We talked about the morphology. Let's look at the life cycle now of these cestodes. Okay, infected eggs are ingested by an intermediate host, okay, the cow or the pig. Okay, eggs hatch and penetrate into the mucosal line of the intestinal mucosa of these pigs or cows, and they're going to insist in the muscle. Okay, this is happening again in the intermediate host. The infective stage takes place. These encysted larvae continue to develop. All right, and then human infection takes place when we consume these undercooked meats that are infected with the larvae. Okay, and so sexual maturation takes place in the human. That's why the human is the definitive host. Okay, adult stage and sexual reproduction occurs in the human host. okay? So in your notes, you should be able to, you know, summarize succinctly, you know, what's happening. I'm not huge on the small details, but the big picture is that this life cycle looks like this. The infected eggs are ingested by our intermediate hosts, which in this case, we're going to say are the cow and the pig. Excuse me. These eggs are going to hatch once they're inside of the cow and the pig, and eventually penetrate and make its way into the intestines, okay? In the intestines, these encysted larvae are going to continue to develop, and humans will then become infected after consumption of undercooked infected meats. You have to include those details. Okay, you can't just say undercooked meats, because if it's undercooked, it doesn't necessarily tell me that these meat are infected with these larvae. All right, so human infection takes place when undercooked meat containing these larvae are ingested. Okay, but that final step or developmental stage for becoming a mature worm takes place in the human host. All right. What questions do we have about this? All right. So let's look at some pathogenic tapeworms. These are ones that basically cause human infection. The Taenia selenium. Taenia selenium is a pork tapeworm. Write that down. Taenia selenium. Taenia saginata. That's a beef tapeworm. And the Diphyllobrothium. That's a fish tapeworm. Okay. These are some examples of pathogenic tapeworms that cause human disease. Humans, this tapeworm is transmitted to humans during consumption or ingestion of undercooked infected meat. Okay, these meat are infected with larvae. This is why it's so important to cook your foods, especially meats, to a proper internal temperature, okay, which helps to kill any potential pathogens that may be present. Okay, and so these are problematic. And you wouldn't believe it, in some countries, people, you can actually order tapeworm, like people intentionally infect themselves with some of the tapeworms because of the side effects, and we'll get to that in just a moment. It interferes with your absorption of nutrition, and you basically become malnutrition and lose all this weight, which is not a good thing, but some people go through drastic measures. All right, so let's look at this schematic of what's happening during this infection. Okay, so this cow or ox or any piece of cattle right here, these encysted parasite worms are encysted in the muscle of these cattle. All right, and we take these cattle and slaughter them for meat, and this beef is now infected with these eggs, and the human host is going to consume it. It's insufficiently cooked. All right, so the organisms are thriving. The human is the primary host, where when they eat this undercooked meat that's infected, you're ingesting organisms. Okay, that head of that tapeworm is going to facilitate attachment into these intestinal walls. Okay, and that tapeworm will start to thrive and grow. Okay, we see these segments here. Okay, and these segments are going to release these eggs off into the environment in human waste somehow or another. It makes its way out to the environment. Intermediate host becomes infected again, and the cycle sort of continues. Okay. Teniasis. Okay, infections caused by pork and beef tapeworms are called teniasis. Write that word down. I do want you to be able to, on your midterm, describe the process of the infection with a pork or beef tapeworm. Okay, Tinea solium and Tinea saginata. Okay, make sure you have these terms down. The pork tapeworm and the beef tapeworm, Tinea solium and the Tinea saginata. Pork and beef tapeworms causes the disease known as teniasis. Okay. Symptoms of a tapeworm infection: intestinal infection characterized by abdominal pain, loss of appetite, diarrhea, inadequate absorption of nutrients, and ultimately weight loss. Okay, and some people exploit these properties to their benefit in some parts of the world. It's not very healthy because these infections can become invasive and, you know, migrate to other parts of the body and do a little bit more damage to your organs and tissues. So we don't want to do that. So tapeworms are not good. Okay, and some of these have very long lives. They can live in your stomach for a very, very long time. All right, so I'll stop here. This is an extension exercise that we'll have due by midnight tonight. I gave you one earlier. Here's another one here. Describe how humans become infected with teniasis. Okay, include a discussion of diagnostic mechanisms, preventable measures, and possible treatments. Okay, you're also going to describe the basic morphological arrangement of these cestodes. Okay, so we're going to talk about that scolex, or that head region, the strobila. You talk about each of the segments. Those are the proglottids. All right, so you're going to describe that basic morphological arrangement. Okay, and then you want to characterize the reproductive strategies of cestodes. All right. Characterize a tapeworm infection caused by pork or beef or the fish tapeworm. So either one of those, all right, that we talked about. Okay, as you're characterizing that infection, include, you know, the causative agent. Okay, where and how these tapeworms can affect human. Okay, so the life cycle, what happens. All right, and then what are some symptoms? And how can we prevent this infection again, which is, you know, making sure we cook our meats properly and so forth. So take some time to work through these tonight. You should also be working on your article critique. Okay, your article critique will be submitted next week before you complete your midterm. All right, so you have two things tonight. Oh, there's two things in here. All right, so I'm going to post this PowerPoint into Blackboard. Hopefully I don't have any problem uploading it. So you complete these exercises. There's another one in here somewhere for nematodes. Nematodes. There it is. So you have the homework assignment for nematodes, and then you have these follow-up questions about cestodes. Okay, let's see if we can get those in by tonight, which is the 13th. Okay. If you have any questions, let me know. If you're unable to get these things in, just work on them as soon as possible, but try to get them in by midnight while it's fresh on your mind. Okay. I will upload the recordings, and hopefully that helps. But, you know, pay attention to the terms that are bolded, they're highlighted in different colors, and so forth.